Before I get on out of here, I had to talk about a story that's very, very important.
The basketball world's golden girl has gone quiet, but the noise around her has only gotten louder. What began as outrage over one roster decision has turned into something much bigger. This is no longer just a debate about whether Caitlin Clark deserved a spot. It has become a symbol of something deeper, something uglier, inside women's basketball. To many fans, this isn't simply about one player being left off a team. It feels like the active rejection of the biggest commercial opportunity the sport has ever seen, and some believe the damage may not be reversible. Now one of the loudest voices in sports media has added fuel to that fire. Stephen A. Smith has made it clear that, in his view, this goes far beyond basketball. According to him, what happened to Caitlin Clark reflects fear, politics, resentment, and a system that never truly wanted her in the room to begin with. For months, the public was told this was about standards. We heard about experience, chemistry, seniority, and how young players have to wait their turn. That was the clean version. That was the polished explanation. But once you strip away the official talking points, what many people believe you find underneath is something far more disturbing. Territorial behavior, insecurity, and a level of gatekeeping that has turned a celebration of growth into a power struggle. And that is why this story refuses to die. If you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Believe it or not, most people who watch still haven't subscribed. It's free, it takes just a second, and it helps the channel more than you know. So if you're already part of the community, thank you. And if not, now's the perfect time to join us. Now let's get back to it. Stephen A. Smith didn't just criticize the decision itself. He went after what he believes was the mindset behind it. His argument was simple but powerful. Caitlin Clark knows exactly what is happening, and the treatment she's received isn't because she lacks talent, it's because of what she represents. In his telling, Clark has become so important, so culturally significant, that certain people inside the sport don't know how to deal with it. And according to the rumors that have exploded online, Clark may have reached her own conclusion too. Reports and speculation suggest she has stopped trying to win approval from a group that many fans believe has spent months targeting her physically, psychologically, and publicly. Whether every rumor is true or not, the perception alone has become massive. So the question is obvious. Why would the most talked about young player in American sports walk away from a major international opportunity? What did Stephen A. Smith see that others either ignored or refused to say out loud? And did women's basketball just damage its own golden ticket in the name of ego and control? To understand why this moment feels so explosive, we have to go back to the moment the news first broke. Normally, roster announcements come and go. A few fans complain, a few analysts debate it, and within a day the cycle moves on. But this was different. This wasn't a small controversy. This was a cultural earthquake. When it became clear Caitlin Clark was being left off the team, confusion was only the beginning. The reaction quickly turned into anger. Fans weren't just disappointed, they were stunned. The official explanations sounded reasonable enough on the surface. Decision-makers talked about experience. They talked about building continuity over time. They talked about protecting team chemistry and rewarding players who had been part of the program longer. On paper, that all sounds fair. But the public doesn't always judge sports through paperwork. Sports are about reality. And in reality, if a once-in-a-generation talent is changing the entire visibility of your league, people don't want to hear technical excuses. They don't want to hear that a transformative player has to wait politely in line while the sport misses its moment. That's where the mood shifted. Because once insiders and commentators started weighing in, a different theory emerged. One that had nothing to do with basketball ability. According to that view, the decision wasn't about what Clark could or couldn't do on the court. It was about how her presence would affect the existing hierarchy. Some believed there was concern about how veteran stars would react to a rookie becoming the center of gravity overnight. Some believed there was fear that the attention she brings would overwhelm the players who had long seen themselves as the faces of the game. If that interpretation is even partially true, then this was never a pure basketball decision. It was about managing emotions, protecting status, and preserving pecking order. And that is exactly the line Stephen A. Smith chose to draw. But his strongest comments went even further. He didn't just call the decision misguided. He treated it like institutional self-sabotage. Smith's response felt unusually personal, not because he knows Clark personally, but because he saw what this meant at a macro level. He argued that every 4 years, global basketball reaches an audience far beyond the hardcore fans. Casual viewers tune in. New audiences show up. Brands pay attention. People who don't usually watch women's basketball suddenly become invested. In that environment, leaving out the player responsible for the biggest surge in interest the sport has seen in years makes no business sense. That was the heart of his argument. He basically said the team was going to be strong regardless. The issue wasn't whether Clark was needed to win. The issue was whether the people in charge understood the bigger opportunity in front of them. According to Smith, the answer was no. He framed it as a failure of vision, a case where gatekeepers cared more about maintaining internal order than embracing the massive growth staring them in the face. And maybe even more importantly, he suggested Clark is not likely to forget it. That's where this story starts to feel long-term. Because if Clark and her camp believe this was more than a simple omission, if they see it as disrespect or even deliberate exclusion, then every silence, every slight, every dismissive quote gets remembered. And that's what has made this moment so combustible. We also have to talk about the elephant in the room: jealousy. It's the word many people don't want to say, but it keeps coming up because for many fans, it explains too much to ignore. Even before Clark played a single professional minute, some all-time greats were already pushing back against the hype. Diana Taurasi's warning that reality is coming became one of the most replayed lines in the entire conversation. Sheryl Swoopes drew criticism for remarks that seemed to question or diminish Clark's college dominance. And that raised an uncomfortable question. Why were legends acting defensive before the rookie had even arrived? One explanation is that Clark represents a kind of spotlight previous generations never got. Many veteran stars helped build the sport when arenas were emptier, salaries were lower, and media attention was scarce. They sacrificed, endured, and kept the league alive through years of limited visibility. Then suddenly this 22-year-old arrives with sold-out crowds, shoe deals, non-stop coverage, and a fan base that treats her like a phenomenon. That can be hard to process. In most sports, when a transcendent star arrives and makes the business bigger, veterans benefit too. More attention usually means more money, more relevance, and more opportunity for everyone. But critics of the current culture argue that instead of embracing that dynamic, parts of the basketball world reacted with resentment. Instead of seeing Clark as a rising tide, they treated her like an intruder. And once the tension left the microphone and reached the court, the story changed again. Because what many fans noticed was that Clark wasn't just being defended physically, she seemed to be getting targeted in a way that felt personal. Supporters pointed to moments that looked less like hard basketball and more like frustration boiling over. The now infamous incidents involving hard contact and heated exchanges became central to the narrative. Fair or not, a large portion of the audience came away believing Clark was being welcomed to the league not with respect, but with hostility. What made that perception worse was the response afterward. Many expected the league, veterans, or media figures to strongly defend her. Instead, what some fans heard was a shrug. The message seemed to be, "This is professional basketball, toughen up, deal with it, earn your place." To Clark's supporters, that felt like a massive double standard. They argued that if an established male superstar were repeatedly subjected to non-basketball cheap shots, the outrage would be immediate and the protection swift. That brings us to one of the most talked about ideas in this entire story, the so-called soft quit. After the roster decision, rumors swirled that Clark could still be included in a backup or alternate role. In theory, it would allow decision-makers to say they still valued her, even if they weren't giving her a primary spot. But according to reports and online chatter, Clark wasn't interested in being a ceremonial option. If she wasn't good enough to make the team outright, she had no interest in hovering on the edge for appearances. That's what people mean when they talk about the soft quit. No dramatic statement. No public meltdown. No shouting match. Just a quiet step back. A refusal to play along with a system that, in her eyes or in the eyes of her supporters, had already made its position clear. And that may be the part of the story that bothers the establishment most. Because they may have expected her to be grateful for any role at all. They may have expected her to accept the leftovers, smile through it, and keep validating the system. Instead, the narrative online suggests she chose dignity over symbolism. If that is what happened, it was a power move. It said, in effect, if you don't believe in me when it matters, don't ask me to help preserve your image later. And the numbers make that decision even more striking. The Caitlin Clark effect isn't abstract. It's measurable. Her games have drawn ratings spikes the WNBA hasn't seen in decades. Arenas have filled. Road teams have moved games into larger buildings just to accommodate demand. Entire broadcasts have revolved around her presence. She has become, in business terms, a market-moving force. That's why Smith's comments resonated so strongly. His point wasn't that Clark should be included only because she's famous. His point was that in sports, fame, attention, and audience growth are part of the ecosystem. Television deals depend on eyeballs. Sponsors invest where excitement exists. If the biggest draw in the sport is sitting at home while a major event unfolds, that absence tells a story all by itself. And if ratings dip, the backlash won't even need words. It will show up in viewership charts, in ad conversations, in executive meetings, and in every quiet moment when people are forced to confront what was lost. Because this isn't just a sports debate anymore. It's a business debate too. And in professional sports, bad business decisions have consequences. The deeper issue, though, may be cultural. More and more fans have started describing parts of the WNBA environment as cliquish, exclusive, even mean-spirited. Whether that characterization is fully fair or not, it has clearly taken hold. For years, the league was a small, tightly connected world. Players knew each other, competed against each other, played overseas together, and shared a common identity built through struggle. Then Clark arrived as the face of a new wave, new fans, new money, new media attention, and a different kind of mainstream appeal. Instead of embracing that influx, some observers believe the league resisted it. You can see it online. Longtime purists sometimes seem annoyed that so many newcomers are focused primarily on Clark. Their argument is understandable. The league is full of elite talent, and no one player should eclipse everyone else. But the way that frustration has sometimes been expressed has come across as hostile. Rather than welcoming curious fans and teaching them the wider landscape of the sport, parts of the culture appear to scold them for showing up the wrong way. That is a dangerous instinct for any league trying to grow. Stephen A. Smith has been blunt on this point. You don't build a bigger audience by interrogating people at the door. You build it by opening the door wider. If Clark brings people in, the smart move is to let that energy expand the whole platform. If instead the message is, you're not a real fan unless you already knew everything before she arrived, then growth becomes much harder. There is also a corporate angle to all of this. Clark is not just an athlete. She is a major brand asset. She is tied to one of the biggest companies in sports marketing, and that naturally raises questions. If a player is this valuable commercially, why didn't that influence the final decision? Why didn't the enormous business upside carry more weight? Some believe the answer is that the people in charge wanted to prove they couldn't be pressured by hype, sponsors, or public demand. Others think internal politics were simply too entrenched. Either way, it created a strange disconnect. A player with massive crossover appeal, and the perfect platform to elevate that appeal even further, was left outside the spotlight. That's not just unusual. It's a stunning missed opportunity. Then there's the most sensitive part of the conversation: race. The Clark discourse has clearly activated deeper tensions about who gets covered, who gets celebrated, and how media attention has historically been distributed in women's basketball. Some players and commentators have raised valid concerns about how race shapes public narratives and commercial favor. Those are real conversations and they matter. But many fans believe those issues have become tangled up with Clark in ways that make everything more volatile. Her supporters argue that her popularity comes largely from her style of play: deep shooting, swagger, drama, and must-watch moments. Her critics counter that media systems often elevate white stars differently. Once those two interpretations collide, the entire debate becomes even harder to navigate. And from Clark's perspective, that may make the environment feel impossible. If she speaks, she risks inflaming the situation. If she stays silent, others define the story for her. If she competes, every mistake gets magnified. If she steps back, the silence becomes its own headline. Which brings us to the leadership question. A lot of scrutiny has landed on the people making the decisions, especially the coaching leadership connected to the roster process. Critics argue that if there was ever a moment for calm, strategic, forward-looking leadership, this was it. Instead, what they saw was coldness, defensiveness, and a failure to unify generations of players around a bigger vision. A great coach doesn't just manage talent. A great coach manages ego, transition, and momentum. A great coach sees the future coming and helps the sport move toward it. That's why so many people feel this was a missed test, not only for one player but for the entire leadership structure around women's basketball. And finally, we come back to the alternate role. For many athletes, being an alternate is an honor. But context matters. For a player widely viewed as the face of the new era, asking her to wait on standby would feel, to many people, less like recognition and more like symbolic containment. It would say, "We know you matter, but we still want you at arm's length." That may be why the rumor that Clark declined that lane has resonated so strongly. Whether formally or informally, publicly or privately, it fits the mood of the moment. It suggests a young star who knows her worth, understands her leverage, and no longer feels compelled to chase validation from people who never wanted to give it freely. And that, more than anything, may be what Stephen A. Smith respects. Because in the end, this story is about more than a roster. It's about power. It's about growth colliding with tradition. It's about whether a league can embrace the future without feeling threatened by it. And it's about what happens when the most important new figure in a sport realizes she doesn't need the establishment nearly as much as the establishment needs her.